Hello, welcome back to the channel. There is rumors swirling that Steam may have just entered the console market. Let's get into it.
We're on a mission from God.
This rumor comes by way of Mike Straw of Insider Gaming. Rumors pointing to a new Steam console from Valve. Valve appears to be developing a new standalone Steam console for players, according to recent rumors and findings from various Valve data miners. The Washington-based company is working on a new traditional system known as the Fremont, along with Steam Controller 2 and Deckard VR headset. In a new series of posts on social media, the Valve insider Brad Lynch posted what he considers to be signs of the new Steam OS hardware. First, he discussed why it couldn't be a dock for current devices like Steam Deck. And Lynch said that the evidence suggests it's a full-size HDMI port being hardwired to the card directly as opposed to being connected via USB-C. All reference to Fremont ensures checks for a full-size HDMI Type A port you'd see on TV-focused consoles and other desktop computers that don't have a dedicated GPU with its own HDMI ports, Lynch said. In other data areas, it shows an AMD Lilac board being used for development while the final board is being completed with firmware specifically designed for this new device being worked on as well. It's also shown that Quanta Computer, the manufacturer of the Steam Deck, is providing feedback on the new system. Valve has not commented on any of the rumors, and as such, everything here should be taken with a grain of salt until it's confirmed. It's worth noting, however, that the company is approaching the 10-year anniversary of when it released its first Steam controller and Steam machines. This could have huge implications for the industry. With the three established platforms have been battling it out for years and the console market seemingly stagnating, Xbox changed its strategy and started to put its console everywhere through cloud, onto TVs, onto phones. They've even taken their exclusive content and put it on their competitor's platform. PlayStation, we've seen, go to PC and start to branch out. They're making different moves with their live service games. The last few have not worked out. Nintendo has very much stayed the same, just putting out its quality content on its substandard hardware. But this could be huge. A new competitor coming into the market could open up that market for innovation. We've seen the mention of their VR headset. If they start developing games for that VR and they don't keep exclusive content, that could help drive PlayStation's VR headset forward and open up the market for new developers to start really focusing in on that market. We could see AAA developers start creating exclusive content for Steam. We could see Valve, again, start to develop games. Or on the other side of the coin, we may see this come into the market and begin to cannibalize sales from Xbox, from PlayStation. They may indeed then take over the market. I don't see PC players, not many, there will be some, who go out and buy this console. The Steam players that are already on Steam all own PCs, and I don't see much of a shift from PC back to console. Again, that depends on specs. The VR market's going to be very interesting. It's a nascent market and something that I think I should be keeping my eye on for the next few years to see where that goes. The hardware and the specs are going to be very interesting to see what comes out in the next few months. If there's anything else that leaks and we can see what they're actually developing. Is it going to be a premium console? Is it going to be an open console? Will there be an availability for modding? Will it operate much like a PC? And will you have options to go to other markets like itch.io, Epic, and other stores to play those games on a Steam OS? The Steam OS itself is absolutely fantastic on the PC. That's another thing that may drive this console forward, as Steam's innovation with their OS being just the absolute best platform on PC. This is very early days and there's going to be a lot of speculation swirling around this. We're definitely going to talk about this one on the Infinite podcast this week coming. Make sure you check that out. Now I want to get into an interview with Shawn Layden where he spoke on the console market and not in the most positive light. So this is an article from Eurogamer. It's around the PlayStation 30-year anniversary, and they've been doing a celebration all week and just releasing articles about that. And by way of that, they've given us an interview with Shawn Layden. He says there comes a time when we all declare the war is over. We have to start interrogating what the purpose is of a proprietary console and whether that can continue to be true. Really interesting off the back of the rumor of the Steam console coming through. It could be a cannibalistic release, that Steam console, but we'll wait and see what else happens there. Talk about it this week on the Infinite Podcast. Definitely check that out. So where will PlayStation be in another 30 years? The end of consoles has long been prophesized, but at a time of spiraling AAA game budgets, $700 premium upgrades, and an audience leaving for TikTok, the thought of us sitting here in 2054 celebrating PS9 seems incredibly unlikely. It really does. So where does the console games industry go from here, and how do you counter these enormous budgets? How can games change? Look, I'll tell you how games can change. I think Prince of Persia was a perfect example. It was unsuccessful. I don't think it was marketed correctly. There was a DLC release for that game, and I did not even know about it. So I think building these big AAA games can still exist in this market, but I think you need to build smaller games around them. I've been saying this for absolutely years now. They need to start focusing on these smaller experiences, and you can build on them if they're successful. But if they're not, it's risk versus investment versus reward. You need to start having less risky investments, and then some of them will pay off. You make your big AAAs, try to gain that money back. You can't now attack the industry with just a one-pronged attack. You need to be coming at it from all angles. Xbox's strategy will, I believe, be successful in the long run, where I feel like PlayStation has stagnated in its single-player games. They've branched out to their live service games, but we've had one success that very quickly fizzled out, which was a fantastic game in Helldivers, and we've had one abject failure, Concord, which is absolutely terrible, and they made no effort to stick at that game. I really don't think PlayStation has the stomach for that, and I think they need to start looking at other strategies. But let's continue with the article. So where does console games industry go from here? How do you counter those enormous budgets? How can games change? And have we got to the point where, to a large extent, the hardware we play on doesn't matter? Read on for more insight from Shawn Layden, former chairman of PlayStation OSG, and definitive response on whether he thinks PlayStation will ever launch games on Xbox. Layden says, I guess you get a new genre activity at the indies level where there's more risk tolerance. You've got to take the risk, otherwise you're not going to get anywhere. But I'm afraid that the current cost of game development, AAA console titles costing in the hundreds of millions, squeezes the risk tolerance out of the room. And look, I made a video on this going way back. I will link it up there, hit the card, about how AAA game budgets are blowing out of control, and they're just not sustainable. I did some math in that and just showed how things are working and how they're running in the industry. Go check that out. If you're looking at something that's going to clock in at 160 million to produce, the immediate reaction of the finance guys is, okay, what is that comparable to? How are you going to make me feel better? Can you show me how the trend line is going to be exactly like Grand Theft Auto so that I can feel fine putting money behind it? It results in a lot of copycats, a lot of sequels. Give me GTA 7 because I know how to put that plot on that course. It's squeezing creativity out at the high end, and that's a problem. On PS1, PS2, 1 unit of hardware could sell 25 games. With PS3, PS4, largely due to the network effect of people getting online, it's much lower. Once you're in your online world with your online friends, you don't leave. I have a son, and I don't think FIFA ever leaves his machine. I think it's permanently embedded inside his PS5. If you go down to the Fortnite rabbit hole or the Warzone rabbit hole, you don't play a lot of games. So I'm concerned about that lack of breadth. And that's the other reason why we're not seeing massive console sales. Nothing sort of breached that PS2 era, because if those games are available on your old systems and you're happy playing there with your friends in that online sort of community, you're not going to leave. That's the problem that we've seen with this generation. And it's part of why the console market isn't growing. Obviously, there's so many other things vying for our time. You know, you've got all of your streaming platforms, Netflix, Prime, Disney. You know, you've got gaming. You've obviously got your life. You can see here in the background, I'm actually at work in my room. So yeah, I can understand completely. Like, we cannot continue. The AAA gaming cannot continue to do this. But I think if you build a moat of small games around these big AAA games, you're going to get somewhere with that. Layden, so yes, if you stack up And look at all the things that were around during the PS1 era, whether it's the Saturn, the N64, the PS2, and the Xbox era. No generation seems to get over 250 million units of hardware aggregate. The one time it popped is when the Wii Fit came out and a bunch of people thought they could lose weight by buying a Nintendo. That's a momentary Christmas. Oh, let's lose weight thing, which shot up the console numbers, but then it fell back down again. Even when you hear that gaming revenue went up 23% during the pandemic, it wasn't from new people necessarily. It was more money from the same people. And this is the existential threat I talk about when I'm meeting with developers and publishers, that you're just getting more money off the same people. It's a business model, I understand, and you understand, and that's fine. But we're not growing the next generation. We're losing the next generation to TikTok. The competition for gaming isn't Xbox and Nintendo. It's everything else in the freaking zeitgeist that can take your time away from your gaming activity. Exactly like I said, 100% true, man. This dude is onto it. The pandemic gave us an unnatural pop for gaming where we thought, oh my God, gaming is the biggest thing in the world. Yeah, when you're locked down, it is the biggest thing in the world. But in a regular world scenario, you've got to combat against all the other distractions that are available to young people. And I'm afraid we're not facing that threat head on as an industry. Layden said we need to address 2 to 3 things specifically. One thing is the exploding costs of game development. Every generation, it costs twice as much to build a game. What costs $1 million on PS1 costs 2, then 4, then 16. It goes up exponentially. The PS4 generation, which was the last I associated with, game dev was 150 mil. If you want to be on top of the line, and that's before marketing. So by that math, PS5 games should eventually reach 300 to 400 mil, and that's just outright not sustainable. And is exactly what I was saying. And these guys who will tell you that like they're doing absolutely fine, it's what you put in and what you get out of it. If you put in 300 million and you only get out 150, that 300 million mark, that's before marketing. Marketing is 50 mil. That's going to go up as well, not exponentially, but that goes up too. So you're spending 50 to 100 mil on marketing. So you're looking at releasing a game for, anywhere from 300 to 500 mil in the near future. There is things that will probably come into play, like AI. I think that's going to take a little bit of the strain off. These engines building out, hopefully, will eventually get to a point where they are taking that strain off developers, and we are getting fantastic sort of AA games with that AAA game feel. Yeah, but it's going to be very interesting to see where the next generation goes and how successful or not successful that is. Back to what Layden was saying. It's like we're at the end of the 18th century and we're realizing that building cathedrals is really expensive. We can continue to build these massive edifices to God for this incredible amount of labor and time, or should we just build 4 walls and a roof and that's a church, right? I'm afraid we built AAA gaming into a kind of cathedral business and it just can't grow any further. In fact, it's probably grown too far already. How do we cap that? How do we bring that back? I think part of that answer is, and it sounds simplistic, but hear me out, I think games are too long. I haven't even opened Red Dead Redemption 2 because I don't have 90 hours. And I'm retired and I don't have 90 hours. For the longest time, I kept banging on about 100 hours of gameplay. This is going to be awesome. It's 100 hours of gameplay. Like, that's the most important thing to know. That was a metric in the early years when the average game was 18 to 23. And when you're 18 to 23, you're time rich and money poor. But as the average age of the gamer moved into the late 20s, early 30s, well, it's the opposite, right? Maybe you aren't money rich, but you're definitely time poor. So I think our approach is a mismatch to that market, to that reality. I fall into that category. I often tell people, it's true, I got 5 kids. I got 5 kids, and this is a job I got to do. I'm making a video in basically a hotel room. I don't have a whole lot of time to play games. And when I make videos like this, it takes time away from my gaming, absolutely. At the moment, I've got Indiana Jones downloading. I'm super excited to play that. But when I got home, I've got responsibilities. So the time that I get to play has been diminished. I have the money to buy as many games as I like. I've built a huge backlog, but unfortunately, I can't play them. So I'm probably outside of the zeitgeist. I'm one of those guys that buys the games in the hope that he'll get to play them. Doesn't always happen. I get through all the big AAAs and there's a lot of AAs I want to get to. I just haven't. Like Ghosts of New Eden. I want to get to that game. I haven't bought it because I'm not sure if I'm going to make it there with all these games releasing on Game Pass. So it is an issue, I think, with the older gamers where we have less time to dedicate to gaming. So 100-hour games, It's just not something I want to get into. I've tried to get into Baldur's Gate 3 times, and I just think of it like a marathon. It's a fantastic game, but I just don't have that time to put into it. So yeah, I think what Shawn's saying here is 110% true, and it's something that I've been saying for a while, is to do smaller experiences. If you want to build them out as big AAA, huge graphics, big set pieces, but short experiences, 10 to 15 hours in a game, and bring it down to that $60 price tag. You will sell more, and people will be happy to pay it and play it. Back to Shawn Layden. I've made a bunch of games that were 80 to 90 hours long, so I'll be the first to say those weren't always 100% quality hours. There are a lot of moments in there where I really felt, am I running across this same field again? I would like to see a world where you can get back to an 18 hours, 23 hours of gameplay, but with gameplay so compelling that you don't want to put the controller down. I want the entire game to be like that moment in Resident Evil when the freaking dogs come through the window and you drop your controller out of fear. I want more of those kinds of game moments. If we can bring down the scale and scope. Yeah, I didn't drop my controller, you pussy. So the interviewer says here, he says, it feels like each generation is getting lumbered with even higher production costs, production values, and we're seeing a smaller selection of games as a result, at least on consoles. That's not true at all. I don't think we're seeing a smaller selection of games on consoles at all. I think you might be seeing slower AAA games coming to market from the big studios, but I think we're seeing more games than ever. It's absolutely insane that it sort of gives you a little bit of a insight into the media, is they don't really play anything else but those big AAAs, or they're more journalists than they are gamers. I got a huge problem with that. There's definitely not less games. There's more games. Layden said, yeah, rendering at 1480p is not expensive, but doing 4K at 60 FPS, that's a lot of people and a lot of time. Let's look at our obsession for photorealism, chasing that uncanny valley. From what I've seen, it's not traversable. Don't chase that. I think photorealistic Mario would be kind of off-putting, frankly. Or when they did that first Sonic draft for the Sonic movie with teeth. Yeah, that was weird. On PS1, our expectations walking down the street in a game was that you couldn't open every door. Now the expectation is you can go in every house, open every drawer. Everything is destructible. Todd, Howard. And that's nice, but it's expensive to make that happen. We have to look at that. If only 50% of players see the end of your game, what about all those millions that you spend on the final level for only half the people to see it? There's so much money being put into making these huge game experiences, and people aren't seeing it. That's true. What would Coppola do if you walked out halfway through his movie? We have to understand, is this a good use of resources? I want a movement that gets more people to finish games, where we make it so compelling they just want to see it, and where it's not so onerous they don't have to spend 3 months doing it. Looking at you, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Eurogamer asks, can consoles continue to exist long-term? Xbox is already publishing to multiple platforms and now rival consoles. Will PlayStation survive another 30 years just publishing on its own console and PC? And will Nintendo? No. Maybe Nintendo. Layden says, let's put Nintendo aside for a second because they live on their own private Idaho, where the laws of physics apply in different sorts of ways. But with Xbox versus PlayStation, the Ali versus Fraser fight, frankly, we have to start interrogating what the purpose of a proprietary console and whether that can continue to be true. If you look at it from my lens, which is, of course, the PlayStation lens, the leap from PS1 to PS2 was dramatic. I remember seeing the PS2 demo for Gran Turismo and not believing this could happen in a home console, but it did. The jump from PS2 to PS3 was also remarkable. We got HD standard. We got not all, but a lot of 60 FPS gameplay. It had a network capability, nascent though it was. Then the PS3 to PS4 was just like getting the network thing done right. Then to PS5, which is a fantastic piece of kit, but the actual difference in performance, we're getting to the realm, frankly, where only dogs can hear the difference now. You're not going to see another PS1, PS2 jump in performance. We have sort of maxed out here. If we're talking about teraflops and ray tracing, we're already off the sheet that most people begin to understand. Well, that's 110% true. And we are getting to a point of Moore's law, diminishing returns, where we're not going to see those huge leaps anymore. I think ray tracing is probably the next, and physics is probably the next frontier for gaming. But what does that cost? I think you really need to up the technology before we start leaping into that. With bigger hardware, We can obviously do ray tracing. I don't think that's too much of a stretch to imagine in the next 5 to 10 years that ray tracing will be pretty standard in games. But when you talk about fidelity, I think we've hit that peak. You know, for the most part, AAA games look fantastic. And I don't think they need to up that realism anymore. So I 100% agree with him. I think there's nothing wrong with playing with different art styles and changing the way your game sort of looks. You know, I think we should be looking at mechanics, gameplay. You know, if you're going to have big set pieces, yep, I agree. Bring that game down. Like, I don't have time for it. I'm happy to probably pay the $70 for, you know, 15 to 20 hour game. That's like a big Michael Bay sort of experience. I think we're sort of missing that, right? Look at God of War. God of War 2018 was absolutely amazing. Loved it. God of War Ragnarok was an absolute drag, man. 2018 was my game of that year, and maybe one of my favorite games of all time. But Ragnarok just was bloated, and it felt like they were trying to build out the experience with the same over and over again. And yeah, I'm tired of seeing that from games. I think Ubisoft is very guilty of that. Back to the article. Consoles are never getting a big leap in power again. Layden says, I don't think so. I mean, what would that leap look like? It would be perfectly realized human actors in a game that you can completely control. That could happen one day. I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime. We're at a point now where the innovation curve on the hardware is starting to plateau our top out. At the same time, the commoditization of silicon means that when you open up an Xbox or a PlayStation, it's pretty much the same chipset. It's all built by AMD. Each company has their own OS, proprietary secret sauce, but in essence, it's the same. I think we're pretty much close to the final spec for what a console could be. It sounds almost like you're calling a truce on the console wars. Layden says, well, you're not as old as I am, obviously, but you've read stories about something called VHS versus Betamax, right? That's true, man. That's true. There comes a time, and I think that Xbox has sort of seen the way the wind's blowing. I think they jumped too early, but they have definitely seen the way the wind's blowing. Eurogamer says, my dad had a Betamax at home when I was growing up, and as I'm saying this, I realize this is going to make you feel old. For our younger readers, Betamax was Sony's less successful answer to VHS, and oh no, Beta. If you've seen The Simpsons, you would know that reference. Layden laughs. Thanks to your dad. So one of the first jobs I had when I joined Sony in 1987 was in the PR department in Tokyo. And one of the first things I had to write was a corporate statement about why Sony was going to start building VHS recorders and how we weren't abandoning Betamax. We were just expanding our offering to consumers to fit their lifestyle needs. But that's what happened. And my whole life has now gone full circle, because when you have competing formats, competing platforms, competing technologies, there comes a time when we all declare the war is over. This is why after the VHS Betamax fight, you saw the industry consortiums come together for things like compact discs and DVDs. This is the technology that we're going to land in. These are the specs around that tech and that we're going to agree to. You might compete on price points and its aesthetics. Do you want to have it in wood? Do you want it in black or orange? But the real competition will be in its content. And content should be the competition for publishers, not which hardware you get behind. I think we're at a point where the console becomes irrelevant in the next, if not the next generation, then the next definitely. And I agree with that. I think it's the next generation that we're looking at. And it is the content. I still believe that you need exclusives to bring people to your platform at this point, but that may change. With Steam coming into the market, that may blow the market completely open wide. So it'd be very interesting to see what happens in the next 5 years. Are we going to end up at a point where Xbox takes its OS off its console and just starts putting it, on third-party developed consoles? Your Lenovo Xbox, you've got a Asus Xbox, that sort of thing. Are we going to start to see like specs very much? You might have a more premium console. You pay a little bit extra for that one. You've got a lower spec one, but they all sort of run the same thing. I think Layden sort of sees which way the wind's blowing, stuff that I've been saying for years now. Eurogamer asks, consoles are now getting mid-gen upgrades, which I feel further erodes those big generational steps. You've said in the past that chasing teraflops is diminishing returns, but are they something of a niche worth investing in? And Layden said, for the first time, Sony really did a mid-range upgrade was PlayStation 4 Pro, because up until then, the new versions of its consoles usually were where we brought the cost down. We use fewer parts. You got a better, more compact footprint. It was smaller and cheaper, and the PS4 Pro was the first time we said, okay, instead of continuing to reduce size and the cost of the standard model, we have some tech here. We have some abilities to take the current PS4 game library and juice it up. I think it really worked well on PS4. I think something in the market pricing that made it an easier transition from your standard PS4 to get a Pro 3 years later. But again, now we're all chasing that diminishing returns point where I'm unsure if people can really tell the difference. If you're playing your game with your curtains open and the sunlight is hitting against your OLED, you're not seeing any ray tracing in real world scenarios. It's really hard to get the full impact of some of these innovations without having the perfect viewing experience. We're going into the mid-gen now with PS5 Pro at the robust price points, so to speak. And it remains to be seen who the market is for that. I think it's a connoisseur market, shall we say. And I 110% agree. I knew that they would do that upgrade, but I knew it would be a mistake. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens with the third-party stuff, that's developed for the PS5 Pro, because my point to that was like, if Xbox doesn't come along and do one, they're going to get stomped out on Digital Foundry, obviously. But when you sit down and think about it, do we really need it? And from what the PS5 Pro has produced thus far, I just cannot see the worth in that console. Eurogamer says, speaking of competing for content, PlayStation and Kakadao Corporation, I probably butchered the shit out of that, corporation look ready to tie the knot, meaning Sony likely owns From Software and could decide exclusivity for the next Elden Ring. What are your thoughts there? Layden said the two companies have always been close. The From Software Association goes back to the early days of PlayStation. They were one of the launch partners coming out with games back then. And then if you look at the board of directors, historically, there's been a number of Sony people who have served on the boards of Kadokawa. Hopefully I got that right. That type of thing. They're not strangers, that's for sure. I don't know what the timeline is on Elden Ring 2. I'm sure it's a bit down the pike. Absolutely. I think it's a long way down the pike. Eurogamer says, if the console hardware becomes somewhat irrelevant, does competing on content see Sony putting PlayStation games on Xbox as Microsoft has done in the past? Now we get to the juice, ladies and gentlemen. Layden says, I don't know what the business imperative would be to do that. PlayStation has been the leader for almost every generation it's been in. You talk about Xbox 360 being a huge competitor with PS3 for a while. They got it out of the gate sooner and grew a large market. But in the end, PlayStation fought to a tie in America and the UK. With Xbox 360, we took a global footprint, and PlayStation is far and away the global leader because it is the leading platform in 170 countries around the world. Microsoft never had that kind of global reach, so they could never build a global market to the scale that PlayStation does. I don't think you did fight back in America. Xbox had already moved on to the Xbox One. You guys were still producing the PS3, still selling the PS3, while Xbox maybe mistakenly started focusing on Xbox One. So, yeah, that's always a bit of a bullshit argument. I don't think that's on the money, but, he's probably a little bit biased. So the question you're asking is, should PlayStation, with that huge market lead and the momentum apparently going forward, should they build versions of their games to run on a competing platform of a much smaller size and scale? As the saying goes, I don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze. How many additional sales would they get versus the brand impact, all the aggro? The Sony fan base gets really upset whenever a game comes out on PC 18 months after the original release of the PlayStation. I never understood that. They do. I never understood that aggro, but it's there. And if that's what they're going to say about PC releases, imagine what they'd say about the market, would say about Xbox releases from PlayStation Studios. Yeah, and I wish that Xbox had that same view, because look, we're no different. How about PlayStation games on Nintendo then? We've seen a Lego Horizon Adventures arrive there, which was first. Layden said, historically, PlayStation and Nintendo platforms have lived happily side by side in the living rooms across the world. It's almost like a natural pairing. Sounds like Sony might have finally forgiven Nintendo for leaving them at the altar. Layden says, success is the best revenge. Yeah, look, there's a lot there to unpack. But I think the main thing is that, again, he echoes my sentiments that exclusives are important. They're just as important for Xbox as they are for PlayStation. It's never a good idea to drop all your exclusive content and the reason to come to your platform onto your competing platform. AAA gaming 110% at the moment has seen some huge struggles from obviously the issues with the political stuff, people coming out and dumping on games, them taking a hit on sales because of that sort of thing, as far as making those games way too big. There's a lot that the AAA games industry needs to change, but I think the first step is building out those small moats of fantastic AA or maybe smaller indie experiences whilst you're still building those big games. When you make a bunch of layoffs, instead of laying those people off, put them on a passion project and see how it goes. If it doesn't work, then I would say lay them off. You can look at Vampire Survivors. That game sold gangbusters. That dude is now a millionaire. And it cost him, whatever it cost him, not much to make that game. So there's niches in the market that are not being filled in the indie sector and the AA sector that I think these big companies need to dip into. I think that's going to help with creativity at a bigger AAA level as well. You may have a hit and they can build that game out into a huge AAA. Thanks for checking out the video. If you made it this far, I really appreciate it. Please hit the like button, subscribe, drop in. On Friday at 7 p.m., we go live with the Infinite Podcast. And excuse the background. This is me at work, so I travel all around. You can consider this, I guess, a bit of a hotel room. I'll be back at home making more content soon, so make sure you hit that subscribe button and the bell to be notified when I make more content. See you in the next one.